Hi everyone. Thanks for your thoughtful questions and responses. The apple is golden to denote its magical properties. This is no ordinary apple. Look at what comes from it. To the fairest in Greek meant the most beautiful and also the best. Beauty and goodness are connected for the Greeks. Greeks and the Trojans might have had an easier time of it if Paris had chosen wisdom instead of love. Paris's weakness, his tragic flaw, might have been his exceptional looks. He was, after all, handsome as a god. Paris's other great crime in the eyes of the Greeks was his violation of the guest-host relationship. For the Greeks, this guest-host relationship was sacred. In a world where travelers would sometimes be far from home in completely unfamiliar culture, civilized life required guests and hosts to treat each other with mutual respect. Cassandra, Paris's sister and a princess of Troy, is responsible for the prophecy about Paris, burning the high-walled city of Troy to the ground. Her gift was prophecy, seeing the future. Her curse was that no one believed her. Prophecies were not written down. There was no writing in Troy or Greece at the time. Prophecies were remembered. Aphrodite was not the only god who chose sides. Feeling wronged by Paris, Hera and Athena supported the Greeks. In fact, all the gods choose one side or the other, and sometimes acted out their own petty squabbles with each other during the battles. Achilles drags the body of Hector around to dishonor him. He is given into his anger. That is his tragic flaw. The story of the golden apple is not in the Iliad. Neither is the part we will hear today, which is also very well known. There were other epic poems and stories in the ancient world telling of these events, but they've been lost to us. We only know them indirectly from references in other stories or poems, or historic documents, sometimes written centuries later. Agamemnon helped his brother Menelaus attack Troy because he, like all the other Greeks, were bound by the oath to defend the integrity of the marriage between Helen and Menelaus. Helen was also sister to Agamemnon's wife. In ancient Greece, family bonds were very strong. Another ancient story tells us that Menelaus and Odysseus went to Troy to ask for Helen's return, and the Trojans refused. The Greeks must have felt they had no other choice. The Trojans themselves, particularly Hector, criticize and scold Paris for not returning Helen and starting so much trouble. It was not just the Spartans, but all the Greeks who battled the Trojans. We have no idea how many battles took place, but we are told that the war lasted 10 years. The Iliad itself covers only about 2 or 3 months leading up to the death of Hector. I enjoyed reading your answers. You were all right to a certain degree. Like any interesting phenomena, there are multiple reasons why things happen in the story. Sometimes historians acknowledge multiple reasons and try to rank them in order of importance. I found that many of you did this. I particularly like that some of you identified themes: greed, longing, the desire to be admired, in addition to the events, as causes of the Trojan War. Now let's hear part 2. First, a little background. The world of Homer. Homer's poems were performed by traveling bards or poets throughout the Greek world. The bards improvised within the outlines of the story, telling it a little differently each time. Like a good jazz musician improvising on a song. Jazz artist Louis Armstrong once said, "Never play a thing the same way twice." That's a little like what Homer's poems were like. The poems were told and chanted and sung for 4 centuries before writing came into the Greek world. The versions we have were written down about 2,800 years ago, between 800 and 700 BCE. They have not changed since. Let's get back to the story. After the death of Hector, tamer of horses, Achilles dies fighting under the walls of Troy. Hit by an arrow, fired by Paris, dipped in poison, guided by the hand of Apollo, the matchless runner falls in battle. Soon after, Paris himself dies fighting under the walls of Troy. But still the war dragged on. Everyone was so tired of it, and no one knew how to stop it. Till Athena came into the Greek camp and put into the mind of Odysseus an idea. Build a great wooden horse and fill it full of the greatest Greek warriors. One day the Trojans looked out from the ramparts of the city. The Greek camp was a smoking ruin. The black ships had vanished with the long-haired Greeks. And there stood the great wooden horse. The Trojans flocked to the shore and argued about the horse. Some said it was a gift from the gods, others that it was a trick by the Greeks. Suddenly an old priest, Laocoon, rushed down to the shore and hurled his spear into the side of the wooden horse, shouting, "This is a trick by the Greeks. I know it. Set it on fire or cast it into the sea." And just then a sea serpent appeared and grabbed the old priest and his 2 sons and dragged them screaming into the water. The Trojans around the horse grew frightened. Surely they should welcome this wooden horse into their city, as to not offend the gods. So they dragged the wooden horse inside the high-walled city of Troy. That night they feasted and celebrated. The long-haired Greeks had gone in their black ships. But while the city slept, a Greek warrior who had been hiding nearby set a signal fire. The black ships had only been hiding in a nearby cove. They reappeared, and silently the Greeks beached their ships. The Greek warriors inside the wooden horse opened a trapdoor in the bottom of the horse and dropped a rope ladder. They opened the gates of Troy, and the final battle began. By dawn the battle was over. The long-haired Greeks had defeated the Trojans and taken the city. And with the flames of the smoke of the burning city rising behind them, the leaders of the Greeks stood on the ramparts overlooking the plain of Troy and the sea beyond. Each thought about his journey home. Some would have an easy trip and return to great celebration. Others would meet treachery and betrayal. But one man would have a long and a difficult journey ahead, lost on the open seas for 10 years. And when he arrived home, he would meet trouble aplenty in his own halls. His name is Odysseus, and we will follow his journey next. The Greeks of the Golden Age would frequently take their myths and make them into plays. Let's take the story of the Golden Apple and see how that might work. Athenian drama had a form, like a song that has a chorus and a refrain. It began with a prologue. The characters speak, perhaps directly to the audience, and tell us what the play is going to be about. Then there's a parados, where the chorus enters, almost like a little parade, and they speak in unison and tell us what has happened before the beginning of the action of the play. The first episode is where the action begins. Then there's a choral ode. The chorus speaks about something connected with the theme of the story, but not necessarily about the story itself. This alternation between episodes of action and choral odes commenting on the action continues. In the second episode, the characters act out the next part of the story, again with a choral comment. In the choral ode, the chorus speaks about something connected with the theme of the story, but not necessarily about the story itself. In the final episode, the characters act out the end of the story. If necessary, you can add more episodes and odes. Then there's the Exodus, the ending. As or after the characters leave, the chorus tells us what we have learned from the story. Let's use this form and apply it to the story of the Golden Apple. First, there's the prologue, where the characters speak, perhaps directly to the audience, and tell us what the play is going to be about. It might talk about struggle and love and fate. Then there's the parados, or the parade of the chorus, who come in unison and tell us what's happened before the beginning of the action of the play. Silver-footed Thetis fell in love with a mortal man, King Peleus, and they arranged a wedding. All the gods were invited but one, Eris, the goddess of strife and discord. Who would want her at a wedding? Then there's the first episode, where they act out the beginning of the action of the play. It's the wedding scene, and the golden apple appears. Then there's a choral ode. The chorus speaks about something connected with the theme of the story, but not necessarily about the story itself. We will see how a great thing, a terrible war, can come from a small thing, a single apple. The gods arguing wisdom, power, love. Which one is best? Now there's another episode where the characters act out the next part of the story, again with choral comment if you want. This might be the scene of Paris and the goddesses, and Paris presenting the golden apple to Aphrodite. Then there's a choral ode, where the chorus speaks about something connected with the theme of the story, but not necessarily about the story itself. Now the man has chosen love, fairest of all, but will it bring him happiness or ruin? Then there's a final episode. Characters act out the end of the story. The goddesses fly in anger. Aphrodite comforts Paris and promises to stay by his side and find the girl. Then there's an exodus, where we get our word exit from. As or after the characters leave, the chorus tells us what we have learned from the stories. It is dangerous to offend the gods. Perhaps Paris should have chosen differently. You could make a play out of any myth, just like the Greeks did. Thanks for visiting. We'll see you next time.